All right. Ready to crank up the heat for this deep dive. You sent over a ton of info on welding engineering, and I gotta say, I'm pretty fired up to dig into this.
Yeah, it's one of those fields that flies under the radar a bit, but it's really essential to so much of what we build and use every single day.
For sure. I'm looking at this welding engineer career guide from RoleCatcher, and they seem to have a real handle on this whole career path. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of landing a job, let's break down what a welding engineer actually does. I have to admit, my mental picture is a little limited, probably someone in a welding mask, sparks flying everywhere.
Well, it's definitely a hands-on kind of field, yeah, but it's way more than just that. Think of a welding engineer as the architect of all those molten metal creations. They're not just doing the welding itself, they're the ones figuring out exactly how something needs to be welded, what materials to use, how to make sure it can handle crazy pressure, heat, all those extreme conditions.
Okay, so less about actually wielding the torch, more about wielding the knowledge behind it. I'm seeing this guide mentions research and design, which sounds like it requires some serious brain power.
Oh, absolutely. They're digging deep into the science of materials, figuring out how different metals react, how different welding techniques affect a structure's strength, that kind of thing. There's a ton of problem solving, always pushing the limits of what's possible with welding.
It's wild to think something as seemingly simple as a weld is actually built on all this complex science. So we're talking about more than just knowing how to weld. It's about the chemistry, the physics, the whole engineering foundation behind it all.
Exactly. And that's what makes welding engineers so valuable across so many industries. I
Hmm.
mean, think about it. Anything that gets built, especially on a larger scale, probably involves welding somewhere along the line.
You're right, from bridges and buildings to pipelines, even airplanes, it's all connected by welds. I bet there's a huge demand out there for skilled welding engineer.
Oh, without a doubt. This guide specifically mentions industries like manufacturing, construction, energy, even shipbuilding and aerospace. These are fields where precision and expertise are non-negotiable, and that's where a good welding engineer is essential.
Wow, it's incredible to think about the range of projects a welding engineer might end up working on. I'm picturing massive oil rigs, underwater pipelines, maybe even spacecraft. The possibilities are kind of endless. But this isn't a learn it once and you're set for life type of field, right? Technology is always changing, and I imagine welding is no different.
You're spot on. In fact, the guide actually highlights how welding technology is constantly moving forward with new materials, techniques, even automation coming into play. Like one example is friction stir welding. It's a
Mm.
relatively new technique that's changing the game in industries like aerospace, where you absolutely need incredibly strong, precise welds.
So it's a field where you have to be comfortable with constant learning, always staying ahead of the curve, which I imagine keeps things pretty interesting. But for someone who's thinking, okay, welding engineering sounds pretty cool, what's a typical path to break into the field? What kind of education are we talking about?
Well, it's not just about welding specific degrees, although those do exist. The guide mentions a bachelor's degree in welding engineering is a common starting point, but there are other paths as well, like degrees in material science, mechanical engineering, or even metallurgical engineering can give you a solid foundation.
Interesting. So you don't necessarily need a degree that screams welding, but a strong understanding of the underlying science and engineering principles is key. And I'm guessing there's a good mix of that theoretical knowledge and hands-on experience that's needed to really excel in this field.
Absolutely. And as you gain experience, you move from learning the ropes to leading the way, designing solutions for those more and more complex welding challenges. But it's not just about the technical expertise either.
So it sounds like becoming a welding engineer is kind of just the first step. Then there's a whole career ladder to climb with new challenges and opportunities at each level. What's that progression like for someone just starting out?
Yeah, this guide actually does a great job of laying out those typical career stages. And it's pretty cool to see how the role kind of evolves over time. Entry-level positions, it's all about soaking up knowledge.
Yeah.
You're assisting those more senior engineers getting that hands-on experience with the research and development side of things, really learning the ropes.
Yeah, I bet those early experiences are so valuable, even if it's just shadowing those more seasoned engineers or maybe handling some of the more routine tasks at first.
Oh, totally. It's a chance to see how everything you learned in theory actually plays out in the real world, how to troubleshoot things on the fly, and just really get a feel for that day-to-day work. And speaking of problems, that's where things start to get really interesting as you progress.
Okay, so less follow the instructions, more figure it out. What does that look like practically?
So as you move up from those entry-level gigs into, say, a junior welding engineer role, you start taking on more and more responsibility. This guide mentions stuff like doing more independent research, maybe even like optimizing existing welding equipment or processes. So it's less about being told exactly what to do and more about you identifying areas for improvement and then coming up with innovative solutions.
That's where those problem-solving skills become so key, right? I bet it takes a certain type of person to look at a complex piece of machinery and think, I know how to make this thing even better.
You nailed it. And then, as you keep gaining that experience, improving your expertise, you might move into a senior welding engineer position. And at that level, you're not just improving existing things, you're actually leading the charge on developing totally new welding techniques, designing cutting-edge equipment, even overseeing quality control on those really critical projects.
Wow, so you're not just an engineer at that point. You're like an innovator, a leader in the field. I can only imagine how satisfying it is to see something you designed being used out in the real world, knowing you're contributing to something bigger than yourself.
Oh yeah, it's incredibly rewarding work, and it doesn't even have to stop there. For those who are truly passionate and driven, there's the peak of the career ladder, which is that principal welding engineer role.
Okay, so now we're talking about the top dogs, the welding wizards, who are basically shaping the future of the entire industry.
Exactly. They're the go-to experts, sought after specifically for their, deep knowledge and experience. They might be leading whole research teams, consulting on major infrastructure projects, even helping to set industry standards for welding. It's a position of serious influence and impact.
It's really amazing to see how far you can go with the right skills and dedication. But let's not forget about those certifications we touched on earlier. How do those play into this whole career progression?
Right, those certifications are huge for validating your expertise and showing that commitment to your own professional development. Think of them kind of like specialized training modules that let you dive deeper into specific welding processes or materials.
So it's not just about what you learned back in school, it's about always expanding that skill set and making sure you're not falling behind as the field keeps evolving.
Exactly. Having those certifications on your resume is like a big signal, especially as you're trying to land those more senior roles where that specialized knowledge is so valuable. It shows employers you're not content with just meeting the bare minimum requirements. You're driven to be at the forefront of what's happening in welding.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like sending up a flare that says, hey, I'm serious about this and I've got the credentials to back it up. Speaking of credentials, I know we have to talk about that dreaded job interview process itself. I'm actually looking at some of these sample interview questions in this RoleCatcher guide, and I gotta say, some of these are a little intimidating, even for someone who's not looking for a welding engineer job.
Yeah, I get that. Interviewing for any kind of engineering position can definitely be nerve-wracking. But resources like this guide are so helpful for feeling more prepared and confident going into those interviews.
So it's not just about knowing all the technical stuff backwards and forwards, it's also about knowing how to present yourself, how to really showcase those skills and experience in a way that clicks with those hiring managers. But let's actually dive into those questions. What kind of curveballs can aspiring welding engineers expect to be thrown at them? Well, I'm seeing stuff in the guide here about, questions about your experience with different specific welding processes, which makes total sense. But then there's some that seem like they're really trying to get inside your head. Like, how would you approach a welding project that involves materials or techniques you've never used before?
Oh, that's a perfect example. It's not just about, you know, spinning back what you memorized from a textbook. It's about proving you can think critically and use your skills in totally new situations. Those hiring managers, they want to see that you're adaptable, resourceful, especially in a field like welding, where you're bound to run into unexpected stuff all the time.
Totally. I mean, you're dealing with molten metal. Things can go sideways pretty quick, I imagine. Being able to think on your feet and problem solve under pressure has got to be critical in this line of work.
It's essential. And that's actually where a lot of those soft skills we were talking about before come into play. Because even if you're like the most technically gifted engineer out there, you need to be able to communicate clearly, work well with a team, explain your ideas, whether it's to colleagues or clients, or even sometimes the public.
So it's really that combo, right? The
Yeah.
hard skills and the soft skills, that's what makes a welding engineer really stand out. But man, all this talk about interview questions has me feeling kind of stressed out on behalf of anyone going through the job search process. It's so overwhelming, especially in a competitive field like this. That's where a tool like RoleCatcher seems like it could be a game changer, honestly.
Oh, it definitely can be. Remember those days of like just endlessly scrolling through job boards online, sending out your resume into the void, hoping for the best? Rollcatcher actually streamlines that whole process and makes it way easier to focus on the right opportunities.
Okay, so less spray and pray, more like laser focus. How does RoleCatcher actually pull that off?
So one of their coolest features is this skill matching algorithm thing they've got. You go in, you put in your skills, your experience, and Rollcatcher analyzes it all and then matches you up with relevant job postings from a ton of different sources. It's basically like having your own personal recruiter who actually understands your specific skill set and what you want to be doing.
That's amazing. So instead of trying to like squeeze yourself into a job description that might not even be a good fit, RoleCatcher helps you find the gigs where you're actually set up to succeed.
Exactly. And it even goes beyond just that initial matching. Their whole platform uses AI, so it can actually break down your resume and your cover letter, compare them to what that specific job is looking for, and then give you suggestions to make them stronger.
It's like having your own personal career coach, giving you feedback and helping you put your best foot forward. Man, I wish I'd had something like that when I was applying for jobs.
Seriously, it takes away so much of the guesswork. And for anyone who's, maybe employed right now but thinking about making a change, Rollcatcher also has this cool feature where you can keep track of your progress, set goals, even get notified about new opportunities that actually match what you're looking for.
That's incredible. We've gone from sparks flying in the workshop to AI analyzing resumes and matching skills with like dream jobs. It's kind of mind-blowing how technology is changing not just welding itself, but the whole landscape of work.
It's definitely an exciting time to be in a field where that human expertise is working hand in hand with this cutting-edge technology.
I've got to say, you've given us so much to think about today. We've learned about all the hidden depths of welding engineering, what skills and education you need to break into this, frankly, in-demand field, and even how tech like RoleCatcher is giving job seekers that extra edge.
And speaking of the future, that leads us perfectly to our final thought for the day. So you've gotten a really solid understanding of what it takes to become a welding engineer, how to navigate that whole job search process. But here's something we want to leave you with. As all this automation and robotic stuff keeps advancing, how do you think that will impact the role of a welding engineer in the years to come? What new skills will they need to stay ahead of the curve?
Man, what a great question. This is definitely one of those fields where human ingenuity and those constantly evolving technologies are going to keep pushing each other forward. I'm really curious to see where the future of welding engineering goes from here.
Me too. On that note, we'll leave you with that thought to ponder. Until next time, happy welding out there, everyone.
And happy career exploring.